Welcome to Tech Field Day. My name is Tom Hollingsworth. I'm a blogger at networkingnerd.net. I'm also on Twitter as Networking Nerd. And I'm here with a group of bloggers at the Cisco Application Centric Infrastructure launch event. We've heard a lot of great messages from Cisco today about how the network is going to become more responsive to applications. And we've seen some really interesting demonstrations so far. But what I thought we wanted to do was get this group together, maybe have a little roundtable discussion about what they've seen so far, maybe some questions that they have, some prognostications, if you will. So I'm going to pass the mic off to our bloggers, let them introduce themselves, and then we'll get going.
I am Amy Arnold. I am a network engineer in the public sector. I am Amy Engineer on Twitter, and I blog at Network Computing and amyengineer.com.
Hi, I'm Pete Welcher. I work for Chesapeake Net Craftsman Consulting, blog at that site. Also Twitter at PJ Welcher.
I'm Chris Margett. I'm an independent network consultant, and on Twitter I'm at Chris Margett.
I'm Bob McCouch. I'm a networking consultant. I blog at herdingpackets.net, and I'm also on Twitter as at Bob McCouch.
I'm John Herbert. I'm a network consultant. You can find me on Twitter at Mr. Tugs, and I blog at lanejournal.com.
Hi, I'm Matt Oswalt, a blogger and data center network engineer. I write at keepingitclassless.net, and I'm on Twitter as Mearded.
Hi, I am Jason Edelman. I blog at jedelman.com. On Twitter, I'm jedelman8. I'll start it up with more of an open-ended question, and a lot of the messaging around SDN for hyperscale customers, environments. I'm curious to get everyone's take on what ACI means for the mid-market and average size network environment.
So some of the out-of-band talk about the ACI capability to do profiling and so on sounds like at some point there may be packaged deployment of applications available. So maybe it makes everybody's life easier. What I'm curious about is the cost and how easy factor. I think those are still open questions.
Network configuration and templates, like we buy virtual appliances now, and you can buy a virtual network deployment.
Or perhaps an application comes with the information that's needed to deploy it. It sounded like some of the deployment technology was the having a profile that described who talked to what, and then you would instantiate that with deployed servers. And maybe the IP addresses got filled in as part of the server checking in with the system rather than the other way around. The other part of it was scaling. So it sounded like it was maybe a deployment engineer package. And one of my questions was, well, how do I say I want 5 web servers or 100 web servers or how many VMs to throw at the problem? And maybe that's part of the instantiation process still to be spelled out. One of the other questions I'm looking for is, okay, if I'm going to deploy software, deploy a new application, maybe with a web server, with an application tier and a database tier, not only there's the issue of how many VMs or physical machines at each layer, but what ports they're using, what IP addresses, what VLANs, and to some extent, I'd rather not care. So does it free us from details that are kind of irrelevant?
Yeah, that's the point I was going to comment on, talking to Chris earlier actually, on how do we get rid of these notions of IP addresses in the network. And there's a lot of, the partner ecosystem is great, F5, Citrix, and Membrane. For L4 to L7, one thing not talked about is IPAM, where what would it mean if we can integrate this controller with an Infoblox or a Blue Cat to say, hey, you know what? We can really get rid of the Excel sheets and the details of managing which IPs go out, because right now, from what's been discussed, at some point we still need to be aware of what IPs are being consumed by the end host. And I haven't seen a demo yet of ACI or the controller yet myself, but I think IPAM is usually left out of integration when it comes to SDN solutions overall.
Well, IP addresses for one thing, I would consider IP addresses because they're dynamic, right? Those things move around all the time. If you're talking about like what maybe wouldn't be dynamic, web applications are always consumed over port 80, right? That doesn't really change. You're going to set that up as a profile, and you say, look, these are the things that I know, and I'm going to set these up ahead of time. But what would provide, for me personally, the value is allow you to make that metadata that does change dynamic and programmable in the way that you're used to. I'll give you an example, like vSphere with hypervisors today, we're able to figure out the IP addresses of our applications. So inside the hypervisor, we know which VMs compose what components of what applications, because an application is more than likely more than just a simple virtual machine. So an IP address would become metadata to that. So you move it around, maybe the application logic inside the application fails over to some other node, and now you have a different IP address, right? That's metadata. But the port, like port 80, for instance, that stuff doesn't change. So it's almost as if you're pre-programming like a profile and stuff that is going to be a constant, but then allowing the hooks into the stuff that maybe won't be a constant. So
I think this will be a lot easier to make sense of when we get a better idea of the kinds of primitives the application folks will be using to describe their requirements to the network. So far we've only heard that it will be application language, parameters that are meaningful to application folks, that kind of stuff to configure the network, but not really some specific examples of what kind of primitives and how they'll be expressed.
I think something that's kind of goes to a point, Jason, that you started to ask about, kind of mid-market, where this fits in mid-market, and also what you were saying about, dynamically discovering that, those application behaviors. Now, I think mid-market customers are some of the ones who are going to be more likely to, maybe not have as good a grasp on what their application flows look like, so something that can help them discover that, and something where the policy they describe for security and when implementing deploying a new container, connectivity to other containers, that sort of thing, is something they're going to want to describe in more natural language for their application. And the fact that Cisco today described deployments as small as 288 ports, I think at least indicates that they're looking at smaller scale deployments of this to start that may fit that mid-market space well.
I think a lot of application developers don't even know what's required from a networking perspective. I think it's going to change the way that applications are developed. You're going to have to be more specific to be able to roll this up into the solution.
Well, those conversations are happening today. I mean, what do you do when you need an application to work on the network? You have this powwow session between the apps guys and the network guys, right? And nothing moves forward until a firewall rule is created or something like that. That's how we do it. And those conversations, I think, are not going to go away, but they are going to change fundamentally. You're going to say, here's a list of information that I need from you, and then here are the ways that you can dynamically populate the profiles that I've created. So like the profile is there, but it might not define everything. Because right now we define everything. We define source IP, we define destination IP, we define port, and those are in access lists. That's also why access lists over time become bloated, because we never go back and remove that excess garbage. It's always, we make changes when things don't work. So I think this is a nice paradigm shift to allow that to be consistent. So the conversation isn't going to go away. It might just change a little bit.
Right, and it ties in very much with the whole orchestration of VMs. Is now you're orchestrating. It's another hook into the provisioning of the network, the moving of policies. As a VM moves or changes IP, they can all be pushed in at the same time.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. That information starts getting tied into the provisioning process rather than into an operational process after the fact,
right,
when everything's already been spun up.
Yeah.
And now the project's waiting.
Yeah.
The other thing that I'm hearing lurking here is maybe productivity, particularly in the small to mid-market. You don't get security because it's a royal pain. It's very labor intense to track down what ports per application. So it's about all you can do to do it at the firewall at the edge, and zoning within the data center becomes really problematic. It's just too labor intense. So it could be a factor, particularly if that information is canned as opposed to everybody having to reinvent the wheel because it's generally documented rather poorly at present. I think there'll be a mix. Maybe homegrown developers won't play, but the high-end products will probably participate. What do you think? Is there an incentive for vendors to provide the information necessary to deploy their application, or is it sort of a hurdle for them, another cost? Is it a win-win?
I think everybody here probably has a niche application that they're thinking of that you're not going to get that information.
So it's a service opportunity for a third party to write an app that does that analysis for you. Right. This is the great, will help you, this is the great SDN problem right now, is you can program your network to do anything you like, so long as we have the information we need to know what on earth it is you want to program it to do. Right. And we've talked about this a little bit. when we spoke last night, one of the things we talked about is you've got to figure out where's your return, right? How much effort do you spend figuring out those applications, which flows are the important ones for you? It's one thing if you're doing a vMotion or you're doing a massive backup job. That might be more interesting to figure out how you're going to treat that versus tiny sessions that just go pop here, pop there. Do you really want to map all that stuff out? And so I think that's, to some extent, it may also be, that may become a factor in how you deploy this stuff, is how much do you actually control versus how much do you back off and say, okay, let's just let it happen.
Yeah, I think in the large-scale environments or medium to large, where there's requirements that are known with L4 to L7 load balancing firewalling, this profile could define a lot of things from L2, L3, L4 and up. But I really do think for the average enterprise, you can build a profile with potentially just L2, L3 and just QoS, and not be essentially not get bogged down by not knowing some of the details in firewall rules. A lot of my customers don't have firewalls between servers. Right now it is wide open. And I think being that this integration is coming to orchestrate it going forward, maybe we'll see enhanced security due to orchestration being natively built into the controller platform, like we're seeing here.
So the existing tools for provisioning stuff like that application folks are used to, like Puppet and Chef and all that. I mean, do you think, because one of the things that I've heard, and when we were at Network Field Day 6, right, we talked with Plexi about their data services engine and how the biggest problem with orchestration is not the programming of it, it's just that the fact that we have an incredible amount of metadata in a data center, and that none of it is normalized. Do you think there's an opportunity to use sort of that kind of same mentality? Because you're absolutely right. There are certain applications we just don't know about. There has to be a human conversation to determine those roles. But in terms of discovery, outside of simply sniffing the wire, is there an opportunity to kind of integrate those tools together? I mean, because like if you think about it, being able to populate, I can't remember the exact example that Derek gave, but being able to populate an access list with whatever Chef returns, that's kind of valuable to me because then I'm using the tool that the app folks have been using.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I think there's definitely an opportunity there. And thinking about the example given, you can do a span port and have a tool dynamically give you the output of what a profile could be potentially. And if it's data fed to a data services engine or something like that, I think there's value in that. But I'm actually really liking a way to dynamically build these profiles, and it almost goes back to Plexi on how do you dynamically build affinities and leveraging that as a profile. So there's similarities and synergies there. Right. It's just a matter of how do we go top down when we're so used to going bottom up.
I'm definitely interested to see how the product manifests. Because we've had a lot of tools to do a lot of this analysis for a long time, right? We've had, NetFlow and NBAR and, deep packet analysis and things like that for a long time in a lot of products. But it's never quite coalesced into a way that's really given us the level of view of application behavior that could be used to actually build network policy without a lot of human intervention. So what's that next step that makes ACI get us there, beyond being just another set of tools that had great promise of doing a lot of control of application flows, but turned into just reporting tools, right? NetFlow started out as a switching mechanism and it turned into a reporting tool. NBAR was originally meant to be, a lot of deep security stuff, and for the most part, it's largely used as a reporting tool. So what gets us over the hump to make this into something that becomes operationally useful and not just another reporting tool?
Well, the common theme there is that you're determining application behavior by sniffing the wire, and that's a great tool to use if you're a network guy. But I think coming from the other end of it, those tools don't cut it, right? Because apps guys don't talk ports, they don't talk IP addresses, So I think that's what it's. And as I speak about it, it's cementing the idea in my mind. This absolutely doesn't make the human interaction go away. We've seen other solutions, and they seem to be kind of like siloing things off because that's just the way that we've operated for so long, but I can't envision ACI without breaking those silos down. I don't think it will work unless you can get over the hump for those kind of applications. Because, let's face it, not every application that's deployed out there is Puppet and Chefified, you know what I mean? So for those, niche applications that Amy was talking about, we're going to have those conversations. And for the static stuff that you know about, like, this consumes a web service, so it's got to run over port 80. That's a constant. You know that. You can put that in and then allow, the developer and say, hey, if you have a need for these nerd knobs, here they are. I'll let you know what the default is, right? So I'll track your VM as, I'm checking the box next to the VM. As the VM moves from hypervisor to hypervisor, I'll track it. But then you have the tools to offer more if they ask for it.
I worry that the human conversation isn't going to be enough, and that the app guys might not be positioned to express their requirements.
Mm-hmm.
And very often, if I'm developing firewall policy or something like this with a custom application, when I talk to the app guys about what do they need, they don't know what their software is doing, right, because they're so far abstracted from the socket level.
Right, they're looking at it in a different set of blocks than we look at it, right? They're looking at some middleware engine and translation thing, and those don't all necessarily map to a server or a piece of infrastructure, so there's still got to be... I think your point, Matt, is absolutely correct, right? It's not, it can't be completely automated because there's still a language barrier there in terms of, the level that application developers are kind of imagining or thinking of their application on versus how that gets deployed in real infrastructure.
But is it developers or taking like an Exchange or Oracle or SAP, understanding that architecture, mapping it back to some sort of profile here, right?
Along the same lines, what about the care and feeding of this? Like, is it going to take more overhead to maintain it as the apps aren't static? Apps change all the time, new versions, new requirements. How much care and feeding is it going to take to keep it?
But does the overall architecture change, or is it maybe ports and some added functionality? So is it incremental? It's a good question. I've been kind of intrigued by another potential aspect of it, at risk of changing the subject here, which is we have this paradigm right now of you can create a virtual machine, and server administrators are getting used to the idea of you install SQL Server or whatever you want on that virtual machine, and then you just clone that virtual machine to roll out new servers for other functions. And that extends into the vApp space, where you take a cluster of virtual machines that move as a body and where you can recreate it with vShield Edge. The one thing that's always bothered me about that is you keep the addressing and you're sort of snapshotting what's there, and you're just doing NAT on the edge to a different public-facing address. And so it seems like if you have the relationships between the servers profiled, and if you have the ability to perhaps change the public-facing address on the server that faces the public side, then that takes the NAT out of the picture, which makes me feel a little bit better.
So that raises the question of what the multi-data center support is for ACI right now. And I don't know if we've had that answer yet, but it's certainly one of the questions on my mind is, okay, within a unit of fabric, yes, we know you can do some good things. What about when I start adding in my second data center and all those machines moving over there, or the clusters moving over there? What's the integration between multi-sites? And maybe that's something we need to, I don't know if anyone knows, but we may need to come back on that as a question, because that's going to be an important use case, I think, for a lot of customers who are in a position to deploy this kind of technology.
Another question that I'm thinking about too is the consumption of these profiles. Right now, if we look at, for example, NSX from VMware, they're focused on ease of consumption, by the server admin, compute admin, to consume those resources. And here, I wonder, once these profiles are defined, how are they being consumed? And I've been using the analogy lately on the 1000V. You can define a VLAN in the VSM, then you see it as a port group in vCenter, and they can easily click that and deploy that port group. And it would be ideal to see some sort of synergy there, right? You define a profile in this Cisco ACI controller, and then you see some of this map back within, vCenter, for example. That's some of the questions, that I'm thinking about in terms of how easy will this be to consume, by different teams in the organization.
I imagine it would be something like that. Port group concept has been tried and true. I mean, Cisco's already doing that with UCS, with Phoenix. So, a server guy goes in and he wants to provision his virtual NIC. He selects it from a list, or provisions a new instance from that template. But the cool thing is, I mean, if you want to maybe drive more value out of that, is templates are great, but they're static, even though they're instances of a template. So maybe give me an instance of a template where a few things are defined, like what I was speaking about earlier. Generally speaking, the port on which an application operates generally doesn't change, but there's so many other things that an application needs and uses and is identified by. Let me change those things if you permit me to, essentially. And that's where the conversation comes in handy, because then you got to tell the apps guy, hey, here's what you can do. I'm going to give you a profile, and it's going to do X. but here's some other stuff that maybe isn't being done by default that you can play with. And it obviously would depend on what those knobs are to see if they would be useful to the apps guys, but something to think about.
So I also thought the QSFP 40 gigabit over a single pair of fiber was a pretty cool announcement. I mean, that's shifting gears a bit from software-defined networkingness to just you know, yeah, plain old hardware, but it's an important, it's kind of an important point, right? I mean, that's been, I see a big barrier to 40 gig deployment in data centers. You know, is the requirement for lots and lots of fiber, and these the new bidirectional QSFP modules that Cisco announced today, along with the Nexus 9000 stuff, gives a good migration pad there, right? So the same pair of fiber that you might have been using for 10 gig connectivity can now be used for 40 gigs. So
and the same connectors too, right?
Yeah, same connectors, same terminations on the fiber panel, right?
Right, and I thought that was interesting comparing to you know, Arista on Monday saying single mode's the way to go for the 40 gig and prepare yourself for 100, and yeah, so they're basically saying start putting your...
But intra data center, nobody's got single mode deployed, so you'd be pulling new fiber anyway, right?
Well, yeah, but that's, I mean, basically they're saying even within the data center, because of the distance limitations on multimode, they're saying you want to be running single mode everywhere. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting having something that comes in at a similar price point for the 40 gig stuff to the Arista stuff, but also then saying, yeah, and use what you got.
Right. Well, and Cisco's
a fantastic migration.
Yeah, and Cisco's data sheet on this product says that you can get over OM3 fiber, which has got pretty broad deployment at this point, 100 meters of 40 gigabit over a pair, which that would cover most of the data centers that I work in, certainly. So
the price point I was noting was something like twice the cost of 10 gig optics, in that ballpark.
Something like that.
So that's pretty affordable. It's not 10 times the cost or 4 times the cost for to get to 40 gigs. So that's kind of attractive. Since we're talking hardware, the chassis also intrigued me. Although some of the price numbers I kind of want to see and look at because they seem very competitive, even within the Cisco product line, perhaps. And so, what are the pros and cons there? Is my question related to that?
Yeah. Well, I think they need to remain competitive. You know, because there's a lot of new vendors now that are coming up with the the white box or the bare metal kind of design, right? Where there's purposely less intelligence in the switch, more meant for the controller, but the result of that is attractive pricing on some switches that can move an awful lot of bits. So I think that Cisco is doing the right thing here if they if they're keeping at least an option for a competitively priced member of the Nexus 9000 family. I think it's got to be there, or else they're going to miss a lot of the market that's seeing these lower cost switches all based on the same Broadcom Trident 2 chipset and going people saying, well, why don't we run this, right? So,
well, certain market segments would seem to be price sensitive. For instance, hospitals have been getting very touchy lately about pricing because they're being pushed to lower costs, IT costs in particular, but educational institutions are generally much more receptive to open switch and open flow and other variants, and part of that, and the white box switches, and I think part of that's just getting costs down so you can get on with doing research but not have to spend a lot of money to get the switching capacity.
Right. So by adding some components to the line that are price competitive and have a lot of that same open programmability capability that other products that use the same chipset are providing. Right. So the XML and JSON, Puppet and Chef and all that kind of good stuff that we learned about today. Again, I think for cases like the higher education, which are usually they're kind of leading edge in terms of what they're trying to do with their networks. Good opportunity there for them to stay in Cisco's product line, but still be able to get some of that flexibility they're looking for.
It's not just that flexibility, though. It's the forwarding horsepower from the Trident 2 plus, well, I don't understand what it is yet, but whatever the ACI ASIC is going to do for us in this platform.
But I think giving you two modes of operation there, where you're either you've got all of the Trident 2 capabilities, or you can switch to this ACI plane that
plus this whole other thing.
Right. Yeah. But I think having the option there to run in these two modes, I think is a smart play. It's got to try to straddle the fence, but I think they need to.
What do you think the delta is going to be for, do you think there's going to be a large percentage of customers that choose to go with the Nexus 9000 but knowingly don't want to move to ACI because they're doing something else? Basically, do you think there's going to be enough value for just the hardware platform?
There's always going to be customers that just buy the next thing Cisco's selling.
True.
And those particular customers probably would move slowly on SDN stuff.
Yeah.
You know, these are guys with a lot of money to spend. And They just, it's for sale, we buy it. But, you know, re-architecting the way their data center works, that's quite a bit down the road, I would think.
Yeah, and I mean, I expect that there's, I think a lot of SDN deployment is very much kind of dip your toes in the water right now, right? People want to be able to build a little pocket of it. So the idea of being able to, from a budgetary standpoint, from a selling management on standpoint, be able to continue, you know, pitching to their management, you know, let's buy Cisco and let's do this. But now knowing that, you know, hey, down the road, we can flip some of these switches into ACI mode and you know, badger our sales team to get us some scan licensing on a controller or something like that, right? You know, so that we can start playing with it. I think there's, you know, I think that is going to it's going to lower the bound or the barrier for people to try some more advanced capability, whether it be strictly the kind of the open format SDN stuff, or then eventually move into the ACI.
It's a refreshing term, frankly, for all of the programmability that these devices have. The fact that you don't have to run ACI to have that, that's certainly not Cisco, or at least not traditional Cisco. That's definitely a change for the better.
Yeah,
but there has to be that extra thing, that magical chip that does, as you say, whatever it is it does, as it turns out. Right? There has to be that extra thing in order to see, especially if the Cisco product is going to command some kind of premium price in the marketplace and is not going to be undersold by commodities, you know, commodity switching, the white box model. They have to have that something extra to say, yeah, I want to buy this product. It's a little bit more, but I'm kind of protecting myself and I'm giving myself another option. So it's got to be doing something extra. There has to be a value add, a differentiator to justify it. Because if you're just looking for a programmable switch, you can get that elsewhere. Right? They're not the only game in town. If you can lock people in on the functionality of an ASIC that's only in your product, you're in the grave, right?
Have we heard whether that ASIC functionality was going to be enabled in all of them? Or was this a feature that you can pay for or not?
It's sort of asking a question that I'm thinking about, which is incrementality. One of the things that I noticed, well, with Plexi and also with Juniper's prior QFabric was you had to really buy wholesale into it. And that was kind of a barrier, maybe even the initial large V-block where everybody realized eventually that, hey, we've got to have a smaller V-block so people can afford to try it out before they really commit to it. And so some of my questions revolve about how incremental this will be, whether you'll have sort of forward migration paths, possibly as extreme as how do I add ACI functionality if I did without it. That might be kind of tough, I imagine. Presto, we've got a chip on the line card. Probably doesn't work that way.
But I do think they've provided a way for the 9000 to be successful even if you don't buy into the whole ACI part. Just like Bob was saying, I mean, you could, it's a well-priced switch, or if the numbers are to be believed, and it is a well-priced switch. So if you don't buy into it, or you decide, you know, I want to go a different direction, you might be able to do that, potentially.
You know, I think ideally it would be great to have customers going 7K, 2K today. And it would be great to be able to leverage the density and 40 gig on the 9K to go 9K, 2K. And in the future, be able to carve out maybe a VDC and then leverage ACI just in that VDC. Is that available today? You know, I don't think so. But it would be nice to be able to almost do both in parallel and slowly migrate and increase the size of that VDC to migrate to ACI. And again, I'm just sort of, you know, thinking out loud and you know,
but it's an easier migration path
exactly.
Going to management and saying, we're going to buy all these switches from a company you've never heard of because it's going to give us this capability, right? Because if that doesn't go well, you've spent a lot of money on something that may not really be working out well for your business, right? Whereas if you can go the 9000 route, buy these switches, even if you end up not doing a lot with SDN, even if it turns out SDN's a fad. Try to keep a straight face, right? At the end of the day, you still have a Cisco switch running on XOS. So, you know, you've kind of had an opportunity to dip your toes in things, and if it doesn't work out, you can kind of backpedal a bit and go, well, we still have the same Cisco switches, the Cisco powered network that we have been doing for the last 15 years.
Is there something in the presentation earlier about this trickling down to the 7000s as well, into the rest of the Nexus range? Or was I...
For the
not ACI, but the other programmability capabilities.
Okay, just programmability.
Right. But that's huge.
But for sure.
Yeah.
Along the same lines, I'm wondering how we can leverage the 7Ks you already purchased. They said something about extensible support to them. kind of curious of what that is, because there are people who have invested quite a bit in that. I don't. They didn't go into much detail about it.
Yeah, it did sound like from reading through some of the words there that the 7Ks are going to be more for DCI. And I read that as again OTV or maybe MPLS features that I don't think are going to be on the 9K, just to be able to have some sort of orchestration from again L2, L3 outside the data center. And I think Sony mentioned 9K as well, the ASR 9K. So to be able to orchestrate both intra-data center with Nexus 9K and extend that right outside to the WAN, multi-data center for the ASR 9K, potentially even OTV to get the L2 extension.
Sure. And if the 9K becomes as programmable as all of this is going to become, that should be seamless.
Exactly. Yep.
You've got ACI, which essentially stops being just your data center fabric and starts becoming more or less your complete overall network orchestration tool.
Right.
And just like the way that today it's going, or not today, but basically when this all starts to hit the ground, we're going to be able to rewrite NVGRE to VXLAN and all that. It's not really that far-fetched to say, hey, I've got a 9K plugged in here. Let's rewrite it to OTV right at the 9K, and here's how you identify the inbound stuff. Write it to outbound the way that you see fit, and then kind of mirror that on the other side. So maybe that's your DCI solution. Just brainstorming.
No, I think it sounds great, and like you said, NVGRE to VXLAN or to VLAN. The nice thing is it's open and not religious to any certain protocol or encap, where you can mix and match and marry multiple encaps to be within a common overlay or a common tenant.
Well, it certainly sounds like we've all had a pretty great discussion about what ACI represents, not just to networking, but to the greater IT community. I want to thank each and every one of you for making the trip to New York City today. I know for some of you, you had to wake up awfully early. I also want to thank our hosts at Cisco for giving us the opportunity to discuss what we've learned and hopefully answer a few questions. If you'd like to learn a little bit more about Cisco's ACI, you can head over to www.cisco.com/go/ACI. If you'd like to hear more about Tech Field Day, as well as watch some of our previous videos, especially around networking, you can head over to techfieldday.com.